What's up guys, and welcome back to Wall Street Millennial. On this channel, we cover everything related to stocks and investing. An estimated 1 million people have lost money as a result of the FTX collapse, with thousands of them having lost their entire life savings. The FTX fraud is perhaps the largest and most destructive we've seen since Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme in 2008. When Bernie Madoff's fraud was exposed, he knew it was over. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 150 years in prison, and he died behind bars 12 years later. Despite FTX's fraud being of a similar scale to Madoff's, Sam Bankman Fried is still a free man living in luxury accommodation in the Bahamas. In recent days, he has given a number of interviews where he tries to blame everyone but himself for the $8 billion fraud in a desperate attempt to avoid taking any responsibility. The most significant media appearance he has made to date was an hour-long interview that he gave at the New York Times Dealbook Summit. The full interview is linked in the description below. In this video, we'll parse through some of the most blatant factual inconsistencies from the interview and try to determine how much jail time he is likely to serve. The main issue at FTX is that roughly $8 billion of customer funds was funneled to SBF's hedge fund Alameda Research. Alameda Research invested in FTT and other cryptocurrencies, incurring huge losses with FTX customers ultimately holding the bag. There are two big questions to answer regarding SBF's potential criminal liability. Firstly, how did FTX customer funds end up at Alameda? Secondly, what did SBF know and when did he know it? Let's listen to his explanation.
Is it possible that Alameda had this loan of such a large size?
So there is that piece from the terms of service, but there were a number of other parts of the terms of service and a number of other parts of the platform on top of that. There is the borrow lending facility, where users were lending billions of dollars of assets to each other, collateralized by assets on the exchange. You had obviously futures contracts where there are leveraged positions on.
He points to the fact that FTX had a lending feature where customers could choose to lend their money on the platform. Some of these funds ended up being borrowed by Alameda Research. On FTX's website, they say that lenders face no counterparty risk, as FTX guarantees even in the event that the borrower is liquidated. In hindsight, this was probably not the case, as FTX had no way to guarantee the $8 billion of losses from Alameda. However, there's an even bigger problem. Even customers who didn't use the lend feature still ended up holding the bag. This means that Alameda Research somehow got its hands on customer deposits that were not supposed to have been lent according to FTX's own terms of service. Sam Bankman Fried's explanation to how this happened is so absurd as to be almost comical.
When we scroll back to 2018, or to 2019, I guess, FTX didn't have bank accounts. It didn't have any bank accounts globally. We were trying to get them. It took us a while, took us a few years. There are customers who wanted to wire money to FTX. And so I think in the meantime, some of them were wiring money to Alameda Research to get credited on FTX. And I think that was a substantial sum. And I think that the FTX's internal accounting did correctly, effectively try to debit Alameda for those funds, but it didn't happen in the primary account. And so it didn't happen, it created a discrepancy between the display of the account and what was really going on there. And I'm still looking into exactly how that worked mechanically.
Back in 2019, FTX was not able to open a bank account for whatever reason. But Alameda did have a bank account. When FTX customers thought they were depositing funds to FTX, they were actually being wired to Alameda Research's bank account. Alameda Research would then give FTX an IOU, saying that this money should actually belong to FTX. The idea was that once FTX was able to open its own bank account, the customer money could be transferred from Alameda to FTX. Eventually, FTX was able to open its own bank account, but Alameda never transferred the money. They instead used it for their own speculative crypto investments, leaving depositors holding the bag. If it was done intentionally, what SBF is describing is wire fraud, which is a felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison. So why is SBF willing to admit this? Because he claimed that he had no knowledge of this at the time, because he was not operationally involved in Alameda Research. SBF founded Alameda Research, and to this day still owns the vast majority of it. After he founded FTX, he appointed Caroline Ellison, his alleged romantic partner and admitted drug user, to be CEO of Alameda. According to SBF, he had no idea what was going on at Alameda. To the extent that Alameda did anything nefarious, it would be Ellison's fault, not his.
I mean, look, I wasn't running Alameda. I didn't know exactly what was going on. I didn't know the size of their position. A lot of these are things I've learned over the last month that I learned as I was sort of frantically digging into this on, November 6th, November 7th, November 8th. Obviously that's a pretty big mistake on Mark. That's a pretty big oversight that I wasn't more aware. I think I was, scared of, I was nervous because of the conflict of interest about being too involved.
Here, Sam Bankman Fried says he didn't want to get operationally involved in Alameda because there would be an apparent conflict of interest with him being the CEO of FTX as well as the owner of Alameda. Alameda had over $10 billion and was supposed to be very profitable. It's hard to believe that you can own a $10 billion hedge fund and never find the time to figure out what positions it's taking on. One person who doesn't buy this explanation is Caroline Ellison. According to a Wall Street Journal investigation, Ellison told employees in a video meeting in November that she, Bankman Fried, and 2 other executives were aware of the decision to move customer funds to Alameda. We cannot independently verify the authenticity of Caroline Ellison's statements, but we can verify that SBF is lying. He wants us to believe that he had no idea Alameda had borrowed so much money from FTX depositors. But is this really the case?
Let's talk about collateral, because I think this entire experience has been a revelation for a lot of people about what might be collateral. And clearly you were using FTT and Solana and other tokens as collateral, and part of that required you to mark them in a specific way, a value to them.
Yep.
Do you think that you were marking them properly?
In Alameda's case, I don't think I was marking them the way I wish I had from a risk perspective. In my head, I was looking at a 30% down move over a few day period as a sort of like extreme tail case event that, we had seen once before. And then, what happened here was a 95% down move over the course of a year, and a 60% down move over a few day period with very little liquidity, and all happening at once in all of these coins in a correlated fashion, in which hedges didn't mean as much also because this was a specific crash on assets associated with Alameda Research rather than all assets.
Alameda posted FTT tokens as collateral to secure the loans from FTX depositors. When the fraud was exposed, FTT crashed and Alameda's collateral became almost worthless. SBF says that he was only expecting a 30% decrease in FTT price over a few day period as a worst case scenario. Because the down move was so much worse than expected, this is why FTX went bankrupt. The fact that he was even doing these calculations means that he knew Alameda was posting huge amounts of FTT tokens as collateral. And this completely contradicts statements that he made earlier in this same interview about him not knowing how big Alameda's position was. When you build a mountain of lies, it can become very difficult to keep your story straight and avoid contradicting yourself. And as the interview went on, SBF appeared to become increasingly nervous and had a hard time answering questions. His nervousness was exposed by his incessant twitching, which got worse as the interview dragged on. It's unclear what SBF hoped to accomplish by doing this interview. His answers were evasive and contradictory. Everything he's said in these public interviews can and will be used against him in court. That's why his lawyers advised him against making any public statements. At this point, he's probably wishing he had took that advice. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about Sam Bankman Fried? How much jail time, if any, do you expect him to serve? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.